Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Caterer Middle East's Bitesize webinar series. If you've joined us before, you'll know that in each of these sessions, we aim to tackle one of the hot topics of the F&B industry today, using a number of industry experts to discuss the issues and answer your questions. Now, today's webinar is the most exciting and relevant of all the ones we've done so far, I have to say. As today we talk about the thorny issue of rent and what has become, and I don't use the term lightly, a rent crisis. Now, while we wait for all of the audience to sign in and join us, I'll just give some brief backstory on how we've got to where we are now. When the coronavirus pandemic hit back in March and we went into lockdown, almost instantly there was a call for current rental agreements to be discussed, put back on the table, and well, basically restaurant owners asked for help. With no income or very little income, perhaps just through delivery, which was its own hot topic for a while, operators simply couldn't pay the fees to landlords that were agreed when customers were streaming through the doors. Now it was an entirely different situation. In the Caterer survey in May, getting help on rent was ranked as the most vital thing for all operators to ensure they could stay open post-pandemic. However, months later, many are still in the position of being locked into contracts they can't afford, and the longer it continues, the likelier we are to lose even more restaurant brands permanently. So, to the purpose of today's webinar, I am joined by three world-class restaurant operators, all of whom have first-hand knowledge of the situation at hand and who have often led the debate over the past few months, and by a renowned industry expert lawyer who has worked with multiple restaurant clients through this current crisis. Now, they are here today to share their experiences, knowledge, and wisdom as we hope to arm you with the tools necessary to talk to your landlords and come to an agreement that suits all parties. We've previously heard some landlords say they felt under attack by the language used by some restaurant operators who have said to me and said publicly that landlords hadn't done enough and were holding them to ransom and other very emotive language. Emotive but understandable, I think, due to the circumstances. However, that's perhaps why, unfortunately, no major landlord, just like the delivery aggregators, were not willing to come and join us as part of the panel today. But this session shouldn't just be an excuse to sound off. We want this to be constructive. It's about finding what's best for both parties. So now I hope most of the audience are signed on and ready to go. So let me introduce the panel and we can get this underway. I am joined today by Rizwan Kassim, owner of Cantine Du Faubourg in Dubai and Nando, also in Dubai, Gates Hospitality founder and CEO Naim Maadad, Nando's UAE Managing Director George Kunnappally, and Jonathon Davidson, founder of Davidson Co lawyers in Dubai. As you can see, an absolute wealth of talent and experience on the panel, and I can't wait to hear their thoughts. We also really want to hear from you, the audience, though, and we'll try to put your questions to the panel as they come in. Please use the chat box at the side to ask your questions, and I will try to keep my eye on it and bring them into the conversation. So, without further ado, let's talk rent. Now, I'd like to start, if I can, with Naim Maadad of Gates Hospitality, simply because, Naim, you were one of the first to say to me when the pandemic first happened in February, March, you wanted a lockdown imposed as there was a stage where restaurants were open but empty as people self-isolated, and you felt lockdown would then allow you to negotiate with landlords and other bill payers about your payments. Back then, you thought it was the most important issue facing operators. Do you feel the same now? And just how receptive were landlords when you first approached them?
Thank you, Simon. Yeah, look, it's been a challenge. I think what we have witnessed over the last 5 months has really been a maturity cycle, if I may. I think what COVID has imposed on a lot of us is to analyze our businesses, every single entry on the P&L, and obviously there are 3 or 4 entries that are fixed costs, and rent is one of those. So over the last 5 months, we've had various discussions. But before I talk about that, I just want to go back in history a bit and talk about the market cycles that we have endured in this playing field, and making sure that we don't repeat the same mistakes. We've had issues in 2008, 2009. And I always use the example of director of sales and marketing in hotels. At the time, these guys had an amazing job. And when we had that recession at the time, they really struggled to sign new contracts, get new tour operators, travel agents, because business was coming to them on a silver tray. And I'm using this analogy is with the same with the hotel asset guys, the same with landlords and their retailers and the guys who are leasing. In the last 5 years, there's been an acute shortage of venues. All of a sudden, 2017 onwards, there's been a little bit of supply coming through. Then thereafter, there's been an oversupply. So COVID has fast-forwarded what we have been witnessing for the last 3 years, principally. The oversupply, I've been very vocal about it. I've even suggested that we put a limitation on trade licenses and business models as such early in the piece 2 years ago. And I was heavily criticized on that. But I think what I'm looking at is sustainability. What we have witnessed in the past is dealing with these young people who are leasing venues. They have 3 objectives. One is KPIs and bonuses. So they have no interest in my business whatsoever. All they do is they have a task list. Their boss says, go and rent. And that's exactly what they do. They don't care about the mix as well within any buildings. So again, from sustainability, there is no sustainability unless there is a clear mix strategy in any buildings. And we've been witnessing that issue. And last but not least, very due diligence is done on the actual people who are signing off any leases, what history, what value they add, what experience they add, or is it just really an ego business? And we've seen a lot of those come and go, and we're still seeing.
I just want to pick up on something Naim said that we heard before, which was what I heard before from Natasha Sedaris, and what I think links into what Naim just said there, is that many landlords simply don't understand the F&B industry, and that caused a lot of problems. So perhaps, George, do you agree with that? And what is the answer?
See, I wanted to touch on what Natasha had mentioned in one of the previous webinars. We have had interesting conversations with leasing directors of several landlords where we have opened up our books and we have shared our numbers, and we have tried and brought it up with them that, look, these are our numbers and this is how the business model works. And even if we do the same kind of revenue in 2 different malls of yours with similar rents, simply because the sales mix, wherein your dining and delivery sales is different, percentages are different, margins are different, it necessarily does not translate into the same margins. And it was an interesting conversation because many a time they don't realize that. And we have had quite a bit of success in trying and bringing them up to speed and sharing this knowledge and getting a positive response when it comes to rent relief during this period. And I agree with that. It is very important for us as operators. And it also helps when many of our landlords are also operators. Many of them are retail and restaurant operators. And many of them are aware of the margins and challenges that different sectors face, and especially during a crisis or a pandemic. So yes, I agree with that.
And George, did you have success when you clearly laid out, the pros and the money in and the money out from the ones who didn't understand? Was that a successful mission for you?
It's been a mixed bag. Sometimes the landlord wants to understand, and sometimes they refuse to understand. With many of the major landlords, they want to understand and they try to be reasonable. But in one-off cases, the landlord just doesn't want to understand. It's not a question of, it's like barking at the moon. It's just that they can't sell it. And those issues. And in those circumstances, we have basically told them that we would shut shop or we would relocate. And it's not a relationship that we would wish to continue.
Rizwan, to come to you, when this all happened back in March, just how quickly did you react and go to your landlords, and what was the response?
So just to give you the location of La Cantine, we are in Emirates Tower. We are quite part of, let's say, the DIFC business in general. We closed La Cantine, I think, around the 17th of March, and my first letter to Jumeirah and Dubai Holding was on the 20th of March. So we react quite quickly. We were quite afraid about the future, and not only about my business, but also the staff that we have, all of us, I think, and the help that we can give to the staff. So our reaction was quite fast. The problem that we have, and as George said, a lot of them are also operators. It's complicated to try to lie to our landlord. The landlord know our P&L better than us. They know what is the ratio, they know how much EBITDA you can do, and they know how they can squeeze you. So for us, we opened since 5 years. Thanks, we are working quite well. So Jumeirah and Dubai Holding and DIFC in general, they know that all the operators in this area are working. And as we can see now, we have two different steps of this crisis. We have the months between March and June, July, where we need to go back and try to survive. And now we're going back to the normal trend that used to be during the 5 years. So it's complicated to come back to Jumeirah and DIFC and telling them, I want a rent reduction when you are still making the same number of last year. So I think there is two different or three different segments is, let's say, the high end and all the people who are working. And the question is how the landlord can help us during this crisis to survive and to pass this bad moment. And the other F&B business where the model was already in a difficult position. And I think the landlord cannot replace the business model of the brand or the business model of the business.
Absolutely. I wonder if Naim, if you check if your audio's working again, if you can maybe come back in and kind of expand again on what you were saying earlier and on Rizwan's comments in terms of if you're open and the landlord sees you working, then how much does that affect your negotiating position? No, Naim, we still can't hear you, Naim, I'm afraid. So we'll get Dan in the background to try and work on that and get you sorted. Maybe you need to come back in. Jonathon, if I can come to you, please, as our legal expert here, you've been dealing with a number of restaurants and from the landlord side of things over the past few months. So I'd love to hear from you. What's been the general feeling from restaurants in terms of how much they've been suffering, and in terms of landlords? I assume they're suffering as well. What's the general feeling been like from both?
Well, interestingly enough, Simon, we can reverse back to the days that Naim was talking about pre-2008, when I was always inundated with inquiries from landlords as to how we could relook into the lease agreement to see if we could accelerate lease rent review clauses, see if we could constantly renegotiate because the market was going exponentially upwards. So the landlords were fairly robust and aggressive in trying to approach retailers at the time to renegotiate rent upwards. And retailers, although they relied on the contractual documentation, they were also realistic and commercial, and they realized if they had the best spots, they had to continue to pay for the best spots. So we were quite regularly asked to provide lease addendums for both the restaurant side and the landlord side for the uptick in rent, and it almost happened irrespective of the rent review clauses, etc. Now, if you fast forward to where we sit today, it's the opposite side of the spectrum. What you have now is you have landlords asking us on one side of the coin, how can we stick by the lease? How can we stick by the rent review clauses to be able to sustain our rents? And you've got the obviously the restaurateurs asking us, well, what kind of legal leverage, what kind of legal triggers can we bring into play to discuss with the landlord? Obviously, they want to be commercial with the landlord. All the restaurateurs around us want to remain. Want there to be goodwill, want the commercial relationship to continue. from the restaurant perspective, there's a huge capital expenditure in moving to a different venue. But from the landlord's perspective, there's a huge risk in new restaurateur coming in and renegotiate the entire gambit. So the rent could be 20, 30, 40% below, and there could be 6, 8, 12, 15-month lag time in getting the new infrastructure in place. So the people that are coming to us, generally from both sides, we're seeing a willingness to negotiate. Typically in Dubai, there is a fairly narrow sight line of how much negotiation can take place, because often the landlords might be private landlords. They might be private landlords with large portfolios who might take a view at executive level that the properties can remain empty, or they can remain furloughed until they get a price that they want to get, because they know that if they go down to the if you like, the COVID price, and the march back up to a higher retail price is a hard journey.
Very interesting. I mean, I think if Naim, if you're welcome back, and as I'm sure if you caught what Jonathon said there, in terms of, back in the 2008 time, when you're pre-2008, when you're talking about landlords trying to renegotiate prices up and restaurants having to go along with it, whereas now they're being more steadfast in not going down the way. That must be obviously very disappointing to hear from a restaurant side of you. And Naim, has that been your experience as you've tried to negotiate?
Yeah, very much so. Look, the market has matured, I think, and we all need to be alert and awake in what's happening around us. I think those rates that were commanded early, 2010, 11, 12, the market has changed. The supply machine has come in, and there's a lot more supply now. What has also transpired is three things that actually concern me a hell of a lot. One is we shouldn't have to compete with landlords and authorities. They should stick to their specialties because we don't get the same benefits. That's one from any solutions. Two is those guys who have been up and running now in this market for the last 10, 15 years should be regarded as part of the mix and should be given preferred treatments rather than anything else, because we've seen a lot of opening and closing in this market. So what some of the landlords seems to be forgetting is that where is positioning of your building, of your asset? And as Jonathon made reference to earlier, if we are to leave, there is always that gap of 6 months, 8 months, 12 months, if there is no legal hearing. If there is a legal hearing, could go up to 18, 24 months with a space being totally empty. And that's not a good sign. The market has reacted. I think we've witnessed a huge lag in between what took place and what we're seeing today. But I'm proud to say that I had put my foot down and continued dialogue, continued on being as transparent as I can, kept places closed until I got my wish list not fully fulfilled, but sufficient for me to minimize my losses. Important. I'm underlining. So it's making sure that we survive and making sure that everybody shoulders some of the responsibilities. Again, one of my colleagues earlier mentioned team members. These are the worst impacted because they can't say no to us. So the landlord should be also supportive. DEWA should be also supportive. Ministries of Labour should also support us. But everybody's just worried about their own little silos rather than all of us shouldering some support. My biggest fear, and I've said this to you, Simon, earlier on one of these webinars, is the industry needs to go back and not just look at what do we have to earn to service our bank mortgages, because that's all that landlords are doing. When they went to the banks and borrowed money to build that tower, that building, that high rise, they showed projections right up here. These projections are no longer anywhere to be seen. So now they can't service the bank loans. And that's all they're worrying about, rather than going back to the banks saying, look, the market has changed. We're all in this together. The globe has changed. The world has changed. Can we renegotiate? Exactly what I've done in my businesses in London. With my landlord, we went to the banks and we said, look, the asset's staying. The only person that's impacted is the tenant. So cut us some slack. Give us till the year end some preferred rates, TR, turnover rent. And then beyond that, we will have a look. In the meantime, as far as the landlord is concerned, they negotiated with the banks, no fees, no interest fees, So everybody bought time. All we did is extend our leases by 12 months without any imminent causes for us to part with money that we don't have, that we're not generating. We were closed for nearly 4 months.
Yeah,
and we still have.
Interestingly, just on something you said, the landlords that we're communicating with, either through the restaurateurs or directly with the landlords, is some of them are approaching banks in the same way as some of the international banks have availed payment windows to residential and domestic mortgage holders. Some of the banks are giving mortgage payment windows to commercial borrowers as well. Very few of the banks, but certainly a couple of them. But the difficulty is that all the provisions that are being made now in terms of rent windows, in terms of they're simply kicking the can down the road, because what the landlords don't necessarily want to do, they're happy to give temporary relief, or they're happy to give to hold the position over to 6 months' time. But that means in 6 months' time, the restaurateurs still have to deal with A, what's going forward, and B what's piled up behind them. So it's tricky. It's nice to think that for these 6 months there will be a window of opportunity, less pressure, but it's also an eye have to be kept on the future when that pressure comes back to play.
Absolutely, of course, the money still has to be paid back at some point. Rizwan, to come to you and to touch on something Naim said there about he held firm and he kept some of his concepts closed over the past few months. At the moment, you're operating with La Cantine is open, the Emirates Towers, and the Neve is closed. Because of that, are you negotiating separately for different deals that you would like from your landlord?
I'm quite in a special position in Emirates Tower. Both restaurants are in Emirates Tower. Ninive is managed by Dubai Retail, and La Cantine is managed by Jumeirah. So I have two different landlords who are both under the umbrella of Dubai Holding. For Ninive, I have quite nice facilities. It's quite something different. Even if we are closed, we negotiate a turnover rent since the beginning. So my impact on the closing is quite small. We closed Ninive for the COVID situation, but also because we could not install any tent for the Ramadan, and it's an open area. So normally we keep the tent until October. So without any, let's say, midterm vision, we take this opportunity to close it and to reopen in October. So the impact for us is really quite under control for Ninive. For La Cantine, as I told you, our reaction was quite straight. I had a long conversation and weekly conversation with Jumeirah and Dubai Holding. So the connection was there. But at the other side, we are talking to Dubai Holding, and Dubai Holding are managing, I don't know, 30-40% of the retail and the real estate of Dubai. So it's quite complicated to become unique in the discussion when they need to manage 10,000 retail at the same time. We reopened La Cantine the 28th of April with a lot of hope. The 14th of May, they closed the hotel. So we are the only outlet open in the hotel. Quite complicated. They are planning to open back the hotel the 1st of October, but at the same time, with the general manager of the hotel and Dubai Holding, we have this kind of nice relation. They keep the entrance of the hotel open for us. So even though the experience of the customers seeing Emirates Tower Hotel close is not nice for them, they play the game for us and they leave the people coming from the hotel.
I mean, that seems like it's obviously a fairly good relationship you're upholding there then. And to come to George, I see one of the questions we have came in from Rohat Bat about something you mentioned earlier in terms of telling them you would hold firm and exit a location. Have you had to do that yet? Have you exited any locations because of the rent? And she's asking, could you share some insights into the agreements that you have?
See, we I want to touch on what Rizwan mentioned. In some of our locations, we have achieved pre-COVID in July, for example. But we have gone back to the landlord and told them that if the sales mix, we have achieved that because our delivery sales went up substantially. the margins are not exactly the same. So if you are in a shopping center, we believe that the rent or the turnover rent should be linked only to dining sales, because you are going into a super regional shopping mall paying top dollar because you believe that the shopping mall would bring in the footfall to generate dining sales. That's where your margins are best. That's the reason why you're building a beautiful restaurant. Many of us started doing deliveries from super regional mall locations to sustain the business when the footfall in the mall dropped. So during COVID, if we are trying to sustain our business by picking up on deliveries, that cannot be an excuse to charge pre-COVID rentals. So currently, we go back to landlords and split our sales, and we show them that our dine-in business is still way below, and our delivery business, where a combination of aggregator commissions and delivery costs and packaging costs and discounting has actually ruined the margins. That just because you look at the top line and you say, "Oh, you've done pre-COVID numbers," that's not the real number. Your margins, or in fact, your razor-thin margins, are actually in the negative. So we go back and explain that. And if a landlord, most of the major landlords get it. So something that is not negotiable is lockdown period. We will not pay a dime. It's not negotiable. Service charges, no marketing fee, no chilled water, no basement. A couple of our single unit landlords have refused. They want to charge rent even during the lockdown period because we did bare minimum deliveries. Like if you were doing 10,000 dirhams pre-COVID, you did 1,000 dirhams deliveries, so pay us rent. Or you were so pay us rent. So in those cases, we have told them, we've even gone to the RDC and filed a case, Rental Dispute Center, and filed a case against one of our landlords in Dubai for an early termination because we felt this relationship is untenable. Because if we can't even agree on that, then there's no future. But we haven't had to do that more than once. And in cases where our lease is expiring in the next 6 months and where we have been unable to agree on a COVID rental lease, unless we renew the lease at totally commercially unviable terms, we have basically told them, so be it, we're not renewing the lease. That's also happened in one instance. But these are again not with major landlords, because with many of the major landlords, we have multiple locations and the relationships are much more solid.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this is a good question to bring in Jonathon in terms of what people's legal rights are. In terms of, for example, I know what has happened to people in terms of if checks are being cashed for rent when there's no money to pay for it at the moment, and the landlord knows the money isn't there, but they're cashing the checks anyway. What position does that leave the restaurant operator, Jonathan?
Very quickly, I mean, the most unique system they have in the UAE, which is being filtered out over time, is the criminality of checks. And it's something which has been part of the headlines and the fabric here for 30 years. I've had a whole gambit of scenarios where landlords have been very reasonable, long-standing landlord-tenant relationships, and there's been a great resolution. I've also had the other side where the landlord, very large landlords and allegedly sophisticated landlords, have and on probing them, apparently accidentally or due to an anomaly in their process, have cashed checks and have somehow those checks have walked to the police station, and criminal cases have been filed based on those checks. And unfortunately, in those circumstances, sometimes the CEOs or the CFOs or the stakeholders for the restaurant chains have been coming back into Dubai. Certainly in COVID, a number of them came back after having been locked down elsewhere, and they were politely taken to one side and asked about the check case. So in some circumstances, landlords are being very draconian, and they use that. It's a hangover from it's a very powerful measure to be able to hang that over someone's head. And in a commercial society, you wouldn't necessarily have that in the UK or the US. It would be a standard relationship whereby if the restaurateur couldn't make ends meet, then an administration or liquidation scenario would arise, or a negotiation would take place. Whereas here you've got this left hand, this powerful left hand, which is a bounce check case. And in those circumstances, it puts a heck of a lot of pressure, not necessarily on the corporate, but more so on the individual who signed the checks. So that's the anomaly of this. That's the strangeness of the situation. Now the question is, what can a restaurateur do? Well, in those circumstances, if checks are the order of the day and checks have to be written, then do as many and as lower value checks as that are physically possible, because the general march of the courts now is that anything under 200,000 dirhams, then the case can be brought, but it's normally resolved by way of a small fine. And then if the landlord still wishes to take issue, it does so civilly. And civil proceedings are natural. Everyone can deal with those. But it's the criminal proceedings which are unfair in the circumstances. But as I say, the authorities have gradually been regulating the movement away from criminality of checks. So long may that continue.
Well, I was thinking, Naim, if it is the situation where, your landlord isn't listening to you, your landlord starts cashing checks that you don't have, I mean, what does that do for your relationship with your landlord? Is that the end?
Look, I must say I've been very fortunate. We've had a dialogue from day one. We've been playing in this market for 20 plus years, so the relationships have been strong. Luckily, the brands and the commitment has always been very solid. So I've been from a positive experience. Nobody cashed any checks. We've been on their cases, but the onus really was on my shoulders to make sure that no checks do get cashed in. So we had constantly followed up and made sure that we don't have those situations. Again, fighting with us. But I want to talk about our geographical location as well, and what does rent mean for us, because we're not isolated in this marketplace. And without the airlift, without airlines operating, without corporate offices going back to businesses, our businesses aren't on their own. We heavily rely on many other industries, many other sectors to make our business function. And yes, whilst all the expats are stuck here at the moment, and this is how our business is actually growing in this time of the year, summer last year, it's not sufficient. Purely based on the number of venues that we have in this marketplace, we don't have sufficient people to actually make sure that our businesses strive and move forward or break even. So without the airlift, again, we need more support from authorities to make sure that landlords are understanding, to make sure that any other bills that we're getting presented, whether it's taxes, whether it's levies, whether it's chilling water and all of that, we need help. We need help. And this is not about deferrals. I don't actually entertain any deferral. If I'm not generating any revenues, I can't defer payments. I'm not making money. I'm not paying you. Simple.
Simon, we've got restaurateur clients, and it's very difficult because the landlord may say the offices are open, the surrounding infrastructure, the offices are open, people can come and go from the office, but many large corporates, quite rightly, in some perspectives, are requiring their staff to work from home. Many of the banks, many of the large management consultancy companies, 60, 70, 80, 90% of their staff are still working from home. So you don't have the footfall of the corporates, then the restaurants don't, there isn't the organic footfall of the restaurants. But the landlords may well say, well, it's available to them to come to work to create the footfall that is choosing not to. So it's a very tricky situation.
No, look, I fully agree, Jonathon, but I think, again, the relationship there with your landlord needs to invite these landlords to your locations, be it DIFC, be it Ema Square, and let them witness firsthand the single-digit occupancy that there is.
Yeah.
And not forgetting that when these leases are up for renewal, I wonder how many of these organizations will sign up and keep those offices if visas allow.
Yeah.
So we need to be realistic. We're not sitting in the UK dictating businesses here. We are running our businesses from here. So are the landlords. And the onus is on us to educate them and tell them what is really happening. This is not about us making sure that we get a discount on rent. This is not about it. This is about survival. We contribute. We have a double-digit GDP contribution to our sector, to our economy. And we need to be heard. And this is why I'm on the call.
As Naim brought up geography there, I thought, Rizwan, we could come to you, and obviously you have restaurants around the world. How has the UAE, do you think, reacted to this in terms of the landlords, in terms of the help you're getting compared to other countries around the world?
Yeah, I was ready to talk about France. Quite quickly, the government announced a deferral loan for every real estate loan for 6 months. So as a tenant, we quite quickly were expecting to have a deferral of 6 months or a waiving of rent of 6 months. No landlord did anything in France. So it means that they had the benefit of the deferral of 6 months without any cost, and they're still asking the rent during this crisis. So even if they waive 1 month or 2 months, the expectation was to have 6 months. And I think the government, when they did and they applied this kind of law for everyone, and they obliged the bank to do that, the problem is the chain, as Naim said. The bank did the effort, the landlord keep the effort for them, and no one had the benefit of that. So I don't feel that it's worse in UAE than anywhere else in the world. Spain is the same thing. We didn't get anything. We have a restaurant in Ibiza, and the discussion with the landlord was simple. The season is starting the 1st of June. You had the approval to reopen the 1st of June. You need to pay your rent. So it's not an easy situation. But I hope with the combination of the hospitality group, we will have some help from the landlord in UAE. But the situation is not better in Europe.
Well, interestingly, Simon, this is quite a quirky point. In certain European countries, some legal firms have put together projects where they're collecting clients, insured clients, to make claims under the business interruption policies. Because a lot of business interruption policies, the insurance, the operational insurance, will have a clause which says that you can be covered for business operation, business interruption. But interestingly, it says, and it covers disease and illness, sickness and illness. Now, these points have been put to the very large global insurers. In France, I'm aware of it, Rizwan, and also in the UK. And there's a class action with over 6,000 operators, venue owners in the UK, which is being raised against 2 of the big insurers. And now the insurers are saying, well, when we said sickness and illness, what we meant was sort of salmonella or something like Leber-Jeunesse disease, something that would affect maybe 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people. We didn't mean pandemic. So the lawyers say, well, if you didn't mean pandemic, why didn't you say, well, and we don't mean sickness affecting more than, say, 8 people? So what's happening is there's going to be huge public common law disputes in the high courts of London, in the courts in Paris and in the US, to determine whether insurers have to respond to these business interruption claims. And of course, if they do, the insurance market becomes at huge risk, and the reinsurance market does, because the liquidity may really stretch liquidity thing. But if there's some favorable outcomes, then restaurateurs can keep an eye on pushing their insurers to consider a response, some sort of settlement cents in the dollar for business interruption. It's just something to keep in the back of the mind.
But
it represents 10% of the insurance contract in France, just to give you an idea.
Okay.
The clauses represent, so we are talking about 10% of the restaurant economy. So it's quite low.
Yeah,
Jonathon, just because what you touched on there, now for people renegotiating contracts or entering new contracts, should they be looking to enter clauses that specifically talk about lockdowns or pandemics?
100%. If I'm going to put my lawyer hat on, which sadly is the only hat I own, I would say you definitely need to push the landlord to negotiate wording for the modern world. We learn as we go. That there are other instances over the past 25 years where provisions have been. I mean, for example, if you remember the volcano in Iceland, that was a very isolated event, but it affected air travel for tens of thousands of, for thousands of miles and tens of thousands of square miles. So it's unforeseen instances like this which need to be written in, because historically, and the classic force majeure that everybody bandies around. I don't have to pay because it's force majeure. So what landlords would tend to do is to limit the force majeure to acts of insurrection, terrorism, earthquakes, floods, and that kind of thing. But it really does need to be expanded to take into account human elements, because as Bill Gates said, the future disruption of the world may not be through conventional war and weapons. It could be through it's AI, human intellect, and viruses.
Well, there's some people talking in the comments, George, about the number of closures that have occurred or that could occur. And in an article on LinkedIn about a month or so ago, you said that landlords and operators are heading to mutually assured destruction. Do you still feel that is the case?
I still believe that's the case because we haven't received the kind of support that we should be receiving, not just as an F&B sector, but across as tenants. Because we still have major landlords who haven't announced substantial rent relief, though it's still work in progress, and the uncertainty is still making it difficult for us to make critical decisions. And we are already into the 5th month of the crisis, and unless there is clarity on what level of support or what duration of support is there on offer, various other decisions can be made, and that's putting a lot of stress on our business. And I think a lot of landlords as well as operators are aware of the fact that this crisis is gonna probably last till the end of H1 2021, if not longer, and that by the sheer fact that it's gonna last another probably 12 months, 90 days of support or 120 days of support is not going to cut it. Because as Simon said, these are critical or substantial fixed expenses over which we have no control. Whatever we had control over, we have already controlled, or we have substantially reduced, and we have gone to our vendors and bankers and we have injected fresh equity and taken pay cuts, and we have scaled down and chopped and revised. And this is probably one element where we need tremendous help from a third party, which is also happens to be our most critical partner in the long run, which is the landlord. And so unless they come to the table wholeheartedly, and we're not asking to make us profitable, we are asking for support to make us survive, let us survive, so we are in this together. And the question of, I know it may sound cheeky, but do you help us survive, or do you build your next mall or launch your next mall or declare dividends for your shareholders? So, I mean, it's what's the priority here?
We're coming into the last 5 or 10 minutes, so I'd just like to remind everyone watching on, please get your questions in now while you have the chance. It's not very often you get this wealth of experience in the one room, so please do ask your questions. I see one that's come in, quite a big general question from Darshana Dinesh Kumar. So I'll give this to Naim. How do restaurant operators adapt their business models in the coming months to keep these issues in check, and what key tips should they keep in mind?
Yeah, I'm going to answer 2 questions. The question you raised and one that Injil also had posted about communication. I think, look, what we need to do as business owners, operators, land assets, whatever you want to call it, is keep on brand, stay on brand. Don't try and cut corners. That's 1. 2 is make sure that brand integrity is always driven, authenticity is driven, and brand extension. So when we did close, I'll give a couple of examples of the activities we conducted. We did online engagements with quizzes, lockdown murders. We did deliveries, the boxes. So the brand never really went quiet. The brand was always communicating with the audience. The brand was delivering on its promise. The brand didn't divert from its offering, continued on delivering. What I have said to my teams, and we're looking at 800 plus people on the team, I said, look, my role in life today as it stands is to save the organization. If the organization is safe, then we're all safe. And that requires talking to landlords, creativity, thinking a little bit out of the ordinary, making sure that we keep engaging with new audience. We make sure that we have repeat clientele base. Stop the discount kings and queens of ripping our businesses and focus on driving business to our doors. And that's why we launched our own app, to make sure that we own that data, we own the community, we own the communication, and we deliver to those who are loyal to us, those who frequent our venues, not those discount bargain hunters. The business model hasn't changed. COVID has just fast forwarded. There's been an acceleration of where we were into where we are. at the cost of SMEs.
There's another question came in from Hassan Maghrabi that I think I'd quite like to get Jonathon's legal expertise on here in terms of what do you do, or through the discussions you've had over the last few months, what happens if the landlord is just playing a hardball and isn't giving any relief except check deferrals and nothing else? As he says, all of these checks are post-dated, they have the upper hand. What legal rights do you have?
Well, George alluded to it earlier. I think it sounds like George is in this in a dispute along these lines. You have to put the matter in the hands of the relevant body. So that would be the rental dispute committee. And if you make the case to them that you're seeking termination, there's various provisions under the law. I won't bore you with the provisions, but due to impossibility, due to the oppressive nature of the contract, perhaps due to force majeure and other elements, you can create an effective argument. And I am aware that the rent committee, as well as the courts, are on the go slow to enforce against be it tenants or be it restaurateur tenants, F&B tenants. They are giving, procedurally, they're giving some lead time. There's been a slowdown during COVID. So if you do go to the rent committee, there is a separation between the criminality of the checks. If the checks are sufficiently small, then the landlord won't be motivated to go to the police because simply the check case will result in a very small fine of 2 or 3 or 4,000 dirhams, and then that's that leverage gone. So basically, it's resolution to the rent committee, and the rent committee will make a determination the lease is finished for one of the reasons I've mentioned, and that therefore legally the checks can't be encashed.
Jonathon, just if I may add, what I'm hoping to see out of this rent committee is also how do you exit a contract without heavy penalties? And 2, how do we bring a stop to this nonsense PDC business that is illegal, but we all do it anyway? Yeah. So I'm hoping that we see that also covered in the recovery process, because that's a huge asset that sits on our shoulders that we don't control for the years to come of the life of the lease.
I mean, the whole PDC, I mean, they've taken a step some way to decriminalizing. So the general rule is now, it's not regulated, but the general rule is anything less than 200,000 dirhams. They may not necessarily entertain a criminal case, and if they do, you're subjected to the pain of the case, but it'll be a small fine. There is definitely a lot of pressure, and I'm aware that lobby groups have had conversations with the powers that be about decriminalizing checks. And I think the discussion and pushback, and the last I heard was a couple of years ago, is that it's such a transient society. This is something, and also remember that a lot of the people to whom you are writing checks are, dare I say, local and quite influential corporate bodies, and they are family members, because a lot of the landlords are the very influential family businesses. So it's kind of a guarantee for them that they know that they can take issue with the individual as opposed to a corporate which has limited liability. But I'm hoping for an evolution as well, Naim. I really am, and I think it's inevitable that if the UAE and Dubai wants to continue to move into a commercial environment, they've got to move away from criminalizing individuals for commercial, for something that's just simply a commercial, an unfortunate commercial situation.
I'm sure everyone agrees that the decriminalisation is absolutely the way to go. Now we're running out of time, just a couple of questions. I have one here that I think would be great for George. I know you've touched on malls earlier. Phil Broad asks, what is the panel's view on the way malls in the UAE are going? It seems oversupply and lack of tourism is going to cause future issues as the challenge is just beginning for the market. Yeah, so George, just, what is your view in terms of the way and the malls in the UAE are going? I know you've said earlier about in terms of rent, you've been saying the footfall isn't there, so trying to get reductions because of that. Do you see there being a lack of footfall in the future in malls?
I think I'll answer it from a different angle. What would an ideal lease agreement look like for an operator? I definitely, as an operator, believe we have way too many malls currently, and if zoning had come to the picture, there would have been better distribution of shopping centers and community centers. And if there was an entry barrier to operators, similar to any other industry, we wouldn't have too many operators who come into the business and after a year, they don't operate. The nuisance value is there, that they've taken away critical mass from a serious operator, and then the serious operator also suffers because it's hurt his business as well. So if you had a certain qualification base that everybody who can bake a cake doesn't start a bakery, just like you have qualifications from a doctor or an engineer or a lawyer. If you had that in our business as well, you wouldn't have so many new to market concepts every year propping up and kind of hurting the business. But if there is a game changer, as far as I look at it, if there is a game changer for us, it would be if, the real estate regulatory authority or the agency in every emirate could include all commercial properties under its ambit. They've done a fantastic job with residential properties in regulating rentals. If it becomes mandatory for all commercial properties to come under its ambit, I think that would be a game changer. And if early exits are permitted in lease agreement, it's a redressal mechanism which works both ways, where if I mess up or if the landlord messes up. Today, if I mess up, I pay late opening penalties and a host of other fees. But if the mall is delayed by 1 year or 2 years or even 10 years in the case of certain malls in New Dubai, the booking deposit is still stuck with the landlord. And there's no way you can walk. You're stuck. So having said that, if the lease agreements become more equitable, I think this relationship would become more long-lasting and more tenable and more of a mutually beneficial relationship. I think we are equally to blame that when the times were good, we were okay with letting a lot of things be. And if we look at Western jurisdictions, there are a lot of best practices which we haven't implemented yet in the UAE, which is probably something we can look at. And the pandemic would be a good opportunity to make these relationships more equitable. And as an operator, we are very transparent with our numbers, and we are happy to open our books. And if the landlords who have been our partners for a very long time, many of them have been very supportive, because once you see our numbers, they understand that we are not being difficult. And these are genuine numbers. We are actually suffering. And if you have the ability to support us and this is, and I think if when they realize that you are a serious operator and this is the only business that you do and you have never created any hassles pre-COVID, and it's definitely not going to last a lifetime, they are much more receptive. And who isn't, then they were never your partner in the first place.
Well, listen, we're just about out of time, but Rizwan, if I can come to you finally, as someone who is, looking in the near future to open new concepts in the UAE, to open new restaurants, what is your current, what are you going to landlords with? What are you trying to get out of them? How has the current situation changed your bargaining position, would you say?
Okay, so we signed 2 leases before the COVID. One was with Al Wasl Properties in Al Wasl Road. The rent was really low. When I say really low, it was a global deal. So it's really complicated for me to come back to them and say, I want to pay less than 50 dirham per square feet. So the risk of my business based on this rent is quite low. So my focus was not on this side. The other lease that we signed, it was on the Four Seasons Jumeirah, with a bigger rent, a bigger commitment. My discussion was quite simple with them. I want to renegotiate based on the COVID situation. We don't know where we are going, and we need your help. We need you to support us. The answer was quite clear in June. My other tenants are making money. They are making well. Namos, Nusret, Koya. How do you want me to reduce your rent when the rent that we propose to you is already in the good average of our other tenants? Take it or leave it. And we keep it, because we still think that we will make something interesting there. So the only help that we have from them is the 6 months opening. We will be on the turnover rent. But to be honest, knowing now the business of Dubai, I don't know if I did well, because the first 6 months is always the better. So no, it's not easy. I think what we are trying to do, and we have other negotiation in place with Jumeirah or DIFC and some other place. Some of the landlords know the asset that they have and know that the other tenants are making money. Not all of them. It's not because you are in DIFC that you have a stamp of success, but it's quite complicated when you have a concept like Amazonico, Shanghai Mi, Zuma, Gaia working in DIFC, and you want to come with a new concept and telling them, I want a better rent because of the COVID or because of the competition of the number of people who are coming. You have two things: or they treat you as a professional, and the discussion is really based on your P&L and quite clear of what's happening compared to the other concept. And the other problem that we have in these cases, you always have someone coming from nowhere, and maybe from Russia, maybe from US or UK, and ready to sign the space at the price that they propose. So that's why you have also some closing. It's not an easy. We don't accept all the project, but this one was something interesting, and we're still making and planning to open end of the year.
Well, you know, although they may not have renegotiated, it sounds like you're still positive and optimistic about the future of Dubai and about the future of the industry. So that's fantastic to hear. Now, listen, we're out of time, so I'd just like to thank the audience so much for joining. Thank you so much to Jonathon Davidson, to George Kunnappally, to Rizwan Kassim and Naim Maadad for your incredible knowledge and expertise. I'm sure everyone watching has earned a lot. If you do want to carry on the debate, there is a WhatsApp group that's been set up where people will be happy to discuss it and answer questions in. Damien Conway has set that up, and he also has a document called the Roadmap to Rent Free, which kind of shows how you can go around speaking to your landlords, which I think could be very helpful to people in this situation. So if you would like to carry on the conversation, we'll see you there. But again, thank you so much to the audience, and thank you so much for our panelists for taking part. It was a fantastic talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.